Welcome back, everyone, to the show. I'm so happy welcoming back to the show the great Professor Matteo Messori. I mean, one of the best experts on Partimento, absolutely world class realizations. And not only that, a great composer also as well. So, Professor Messori, Happy New Year and welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here once again to discuss about formal and informal things. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And we had a great conversation. I mean, I think it was like almost 2 hours the last time. We learned so many things. I learned about the Bologna school. I learned about Padre Martini and just so many interesting things about another aspect of Partimento from another part of Italy. And just really getting so much knowledge about the Baroque period as well. But, this is interesting because today we have prepared actually a lot of examples and realizations, original compositions, and we're going to actually discuss your thinking process of the realization. And maybe because a lot of students, a lot of people are very interested in Partimento, it's very rare to find uh, enough practical examples on the internet. It's very hard to find because it's just not many people are uploading them. Of course, there are plenty of there's a growing number of people who are interested in this topic. So we have a very special show today. We're going to show so many examples, and you're going to explain to the audience and explain to me what is going on in your mind when you're creating these examples. And also, one thing that I'm going to save for the end, which I think is very special, is your compositions, which, because, when people talk about Partimento, they think, okay, it's old, okay, fine. Maybe if I want to play older styles of music, then I will stay in this period. But, I have heard some of your more, you could say, modern compositions, and it's amazing. And it doesn't sound like the Baroque, but obviously I can see some influences. But what I really am curious to get from you is the thinking of how that you can make even a modern sound with the continual thinking and counterpoint and the so-called old method. So why don't we start first with some music? Do you think that's a good idea? We should just start with
Yeah.
music. I think that'll. So can you just talk about these two canzonas that you've prepared here?
Yes, these are very important. I think the earliest known samples of Partimento stuffs for keyboard, for organ specifically. In the earliest we know from the second half of the 17th century. So this is music, I think, is anonymous, and I'm trying to discover, to investigate who is the great composer of this music, but I had no success. I find it in the library of Padre Martini. It's one of the biggest and the most important music library as known as of Europe. But this collection of 48 versets, organ versets, in the 8 church tones, and 25 canzonas. 25 canzonas. Some canzonas are not complete. This music, I think, is from North Italy or Central Italy, in a range between 1660 to 1685. So it's music written by a great organist, a great counterpoint master, great teacher, but we don't know actually this manuscript, the origin of the manuscript. I thought that could be Bolognese music or Roman music. Of course, could be also music written in some monastery, maybe Franciscan monastery, because Martini had many connections, of course, with Library of Europe, music library, but not only music library in general, but a lot of collections from Franciscan masters, organists. For example, one very important composer, Partimento composer, organ, sonate capricciose per organo, recently published by the Franciscan editions in Padua, by Michele Chiaramida, is Benedetti, that was a Franciscan organist in Assisi, and then in Piemonte, in Turin, in Aosta. And these are beautiful organ sonatas for Italian organ, of course, from 1720. And this music is from a Franciscan monk, priest. And so this collection of canzonas, that is much earlier, would be also written by a priest, an organist in a monastery. But this excellent music, I find this music, this collection, really between the best Italian organ music, for sure is Italian. Would be also be South German, of course, but we have less probability that Padre Martini get in touch with this music from South Germany. But we know that young Kaspar Kerl recorded his complete keyboard works recently, and Kaspar Kerl was a student in Rome under Carissimi, under Froberger, and so could be also a collection. There is something similar in the style of the subjects, of the themes of these canzonas, to the new violin keyboard style of the second half of this wonderful music century, that is the 17th century. So this music is very important because we have, for the first time, I think, after Banchieri, the oldest written partimentos we have, as Luigi Ferdinando Tagliavini wrote, are the verset, the organ versets by Banchieri, Adriano Banchieri, Bolognese, like me, and like Tagliavini, and like Padre Martini, and many other great musicians. I had the opportunity to know, and Sergio Bartolo, Francesco Cera. There is a Bologna early music tradition that is very important for the early music movement in Italy. Okay. Everything started in the last 50 years from Bologna, I think. But from the Cappella Musicale of San Petronio, so from Luigi Ferdinando Tagliavini, Sergio Bartolo, Francesco Cera. I studied with both Bartolo and Cera. Under Cera when I was very, very young. Under Bartolo I studied harpsichord in conservatory, and I had the occasion to work together and to discuss music deeply all my life, and in a mutual relationship, musical relationship, and so I think we could think that the Partimento. Now there is a big polemic without any sense about the word Partimento. So I would like to spend some words about it, because many times I was no, these are not. I published these canzonas for Armando Carideo editions, so in Levante, not so this direction, and these are 25 canzonas and 48 organ versets in basso continuo. This title was decided by me because you know that Bernardo Pasquini, the other great Partimento master, because we still preserve Partimentos by him, because Partimento was normal from the basso continuo age, general bass side, till Puccini, till later, till the 50s. So this was a normal practice in all Europe, and we will speak maybe about it also in the Romantic era. I have here one of the most important Partimento treatises, Harmonie pratique for the Paris Conservatory, that written by Panseron. Panseron was student in Bologna of Padre Mattei, student of Padre Martini, of course. So and was very friend in Paris, and not only in Paris, but of Rossini, also an Enkelschüler in German, I don't know in English, a pupil of Padre Martini. So Rossini was he knows, he is considered himself like a student of Padre Martini. He told, through the words of a Parisian critician after the Petit Solennel first performance, he told a little anecdote about the fact he didn't study enough counterpoint under Padre Mattei. But there is this little anecdote, very nice, and he told, but I told Padre Mattei, one day, dear father, I will show you, when I will have time to write things for myself and not to live, so to do operas, I will show to you and to the world that I'm a worth student of the Padre Martini school. So this was, of course, the Petit Solennel. That is a Bolognese mass mixed to the influences of Bach. That was Rossini was a Bach fan, a big Bach fan, and of Beethoven, of Mozart, Haydn. This always because he was the Tedeschino, called in Bologna, the Tedeschane. Padre Mattei called him a little bit in a negative sense, I think, for Padre Mattei. Rossini has a Tedeschino, so a little German, an imitator of Haydn and Mozart, of course. But later Rossini discovered Bach and Beethoven, of course, and he was a Bach fan. He told it to Ferdinand Hiller, to Richard Wagner. He told him to other Germans, Austrian composers. And when somebody came to Bologna to visit him, there was they were surprised that he knew Bach. But for sure, he knew Bach already as a student, because during his nights, he spent his nights in the Padre Mattei home, where all the Padre Martini library was in that moment, because Napoleon closed the monasteries. So all the library of Martini was taken by Padre Mattei in his apartment, where he lived with the mother, the old mother, and Rossini also Donizetti later. They spend the nights to play cards with the mother of Padre Mattei. But Rossini, in some souvenirs written by a friend from Lugo, told that he spent all the night with the candles to learn things in the historical library, all the stuffs of Padre Martini, and he told to this friend, my favorite music is the Latin sacred music. They think I'm the light Rossini, but I studied a lot. He told this in the last years of his life, so when he was more depressive, more, and also more deep, but he was a genius, probably an improviser, incredible improviser. We know that in Naples, he improvised the melodrama with singing and playing piano together, improvising for hours. So these are fruits of the improvisation tradition that is what we call in some way Partimento. What is Partimento? Partimento is a southern Italian word, maybe not so southern, but it was used by Montalbano, for example, in order to indicate, to call the basso continuo. So the Partimento for the organ, the bass part for organ, when they had Einzelstimmen, so the singular parts of the sonato or motet, the Partimento for the organ was this that in Venice, in North Italy, they called for il basso generale for the organ, or basso continuo for the organ. So in the south, Partimento is the Partimento, extracted from the score of the continuo, so basso seguente, because, and we speak a little bit now about basso seguente for these canzonas, because these canzonas are completely different from what we think Partimento is in the 18th century. Here we have the real counterpoint, the last tradition of the Italian Renaissance counterpoint after Frescobaldi in instrumental style, in instrumental keyboard style, for improvisation, for didactical reasons, but we have still a very deep counterpoint understanding and also requirement. The organist who plays this music has to know very good the post Zarlino counterpoint rules. They have not anything to do with regola dell'ottava, with the ottava, with the scala armonizzata, with in Italian, harmonized scale. This is an understanding of counterpoint before the fixing of tonal system. And tonal system, what is a very simple thing. We have 8 church modes, tones modes, the same, and that became 12. Glareanus told in the hand of, if I don't make mistake, in the hand of 15th century, from 50, 100 years, musicians are using more than 8 tones, so 12. And so we have 12 tones. We have 4 new tones. The 9th, the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th. And the 9th and 10th, as finale, they have A of German. So La in modern Italian. And the 11th and 12th, they have C, Do in Italian, C of Deutsch. And this, we know that Fuchs in the Gradus ad Parnassum is a very important, fundamental counterpoint treatise for the Stilus Antiquus, the Neo-Palestrinian way of the late Baroque era, age. So, and he fixed the 5 species of counterpoint, the 4 species of the florid counterpoint. All this was taken by Padre Martini completely, and also from the Naples school, of course. And then Cherubini, that is a fruit of Sarti, of the Bologna school, Bologna and also Padua school. We will speak about Padua a little bit, but about degrees, harmony, and things, Rameau. But the Fuchs tell we have 6 modes, 6 tones, because he's not anymore interested in the difference between authentic mode and the plagal mode. So the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. This is not anymore. Is not no more important for the late Baroque tonal understatement, also contrapunct understanding. So what happened? That these 6 tones, finalis D, finalis E, F, G, A, and C, of these 6 common tones, the first time I have written about it in my dictionary article about Antonio Valente, the Naples organist of the Renaissance. I have written that in the organ versets by Valente, we have for the first time 100 years before Fuchs, more than 100 years, 120 years before than Fuchs, the statement for the 6 common church tones that are the union between authentic and plagal. The last 2 invented or used, the A became the minor, the C became the major. So the newest are the only to remain in the musical system. So this is so which is the difference between modal system and tonal system? There is no difference. This told me my historical counterpoint professor, really a very prolific composer in Baroque, and not only in Baroque. That is Giorgio Pacchioni. Who is Giorgio Pacchioni? He told me there is no difference. There are fashion differences. There is, of course, a progress or a change in the tastes, in the fashions of the composition. But in general, the late Renaissance 12 tone system is more complex, is more complicated, is more, because we have more different effects from the church mode. But after we have only two tones, minor and major, and this is too few for the variety human being request. And what happens? We have a new possibility, the free modulation, and this is connected with temperament, probably, of course. So when in the develop to the origin, to the Greek origins, so the equal temperament, that was the first and it's the best temperament possible, of course. And this was, I have written recently for a recording I did together Lina Turbonet, a Spanish violinist. She's a professor in Weimar of Baroque violin. She's a virtuoso violin player of modern Baroque. And we recorded the Bach concert for Glossa. And I played basso continuo at the harpsichord. But and I decided to tune harpsichord equal. In Bach, I always tune harpsichord and clavichord equal. And all these problems of Rosetta, these are completely, I think, misunderstanding, because there are so many sources, and clearly, also many scholars have told the same than me. But now in the early music world, I'm a member, a little bit anarchist maybe, but a member of the early music world in some way. But a little bit maybe not in my way of independently, but of course
a maverick.
But I remember also Gustav Leonhardt recorded Bach in equal temperament, because for in a period was clear that Bach was the reach point of equal temperament. That was a long Roman Baroque Jesuit, and this Patrizio Barbieri, our Italian most important tuning and temperaments scholar, he wrote a beautiful article about the equal temperament in the Frescobaldi Rome age, and Patrizio Barbieri shows the famous thing that Frescobaldi wanted to tune organ equal, and the organ is, of course, the less the instrument who that less where the equal temperament is dangerous, because we have long notes, and the equal temperament is all untuned. No, everything is untuned. The third, the sixth, the fifth, and the fifth. So, but Frescobaldi wanted to tune the organ of San Lorenzo in Damaso equal, but they didn't permit, because the church was conservative, and musicians, big musician, great musician, less. What happens? The same was in Germany. There was a Lutheran reform, and I'm Lutheran personally. You know, we discussed about it many times, and I'm my view is Lutheran, and there is a reformation of church in sense of early church. And what happens? That there is, maybe in German we could see a little bit. This is provocative, but I think correct.
Let's hear it.
We could see not only the music, but in some way, until a moment that is Sturm und Drang. After is different, but between Luther and to Bach, and not only, but to this age, more or less, Germany wants imitate Italy, and want to be better than Italy in an Italian sense of the word. So what happens? Luther tell the Pope is mistaken. We have the real early church. Rome is schismatic. Schismatic. How is it in English? Schisma or schisma?
I guess, schism, I would say. Yeah.
Schismatic. What happens in the music of after Schütz? Schütz wrote that Italy is the real school of every music. and he went twice to Venice. He was friend with Monteverdi. He was influenced by Alessandro Grandi, by Trabacci, the motets by Trabacci, the motets by Maione, were ordered by Schütz, and the reaction, the musical reaction by Schütz is the Geistliche Chormusik. These are completely Napolitan motets with Lutheran clothes, no? Lutheran texts, but the texts are from Lutheran Bible, so are biblical. Some part of Schütz production is Latin. Latin is the language of church also for Lutheran. The Missa, Kyrie Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, Agnus, or Agnus, is always the fundamental of liturgy of Lutheran. The real presence in the sacrament is, of course, very, very important, fundamental for Luther. Luther is against the Calvinist much more than against the Roman, always with the Pope against Calvin. And Bach, in his library, had a very important text, Lutheranismus oder Anti-Calvinismus. So it was strong for Bach. In Cöthen, Bach, the prince, was Calvinist, but Bach had not to do with church music, because he was very friend with in friendly relations with the prince, but they are differently Christian. No? So what happens in German music? They want to make better than Italian, like in religion. No? And so what happens? Jesuits in Rome, Spanish Jesuit, Bohemian Jesuit, started to diffuse. Is correct? Diffuse. Sorry for my English.
No, your English is great.
Equal temperament, but where was possible to arrive to it in a word that has something in direction of freedom more than the
Liberate,
more liberal in some way. So also counterpoint. The German late 17th century counterpoint, the Thuringian motets, the Bach, when Bach was a child, what he found in Thuringia, in Saxony, is different from the Italian didactical system of the conservatories in Naples or of Bologna school. So the Bologna school is much before Padre Martini, of course. It's a singing school, but singing, contrapoint, keyboard, and the composition are the same professor. So, and also violin, of course, violin is a way to accompany the bass. The right hand, the violin, the accompagnamento is not the artist who accompany the voices, but the voices are historically intended the accompaniment of the bass. Every part on the bass in the basso continuo age, also in Brahms, are accompaniment of the bass. And this is the most, when we call partimento in South, is the same word. Partimento is basso continuo. But partimento in sense of solistic keyboard exercise, so a basso continuo not written primarily to play with singers or with a violinist, but alone. Is partimento in South, but in North, Ristori, Bolognese school, in Vienna, a lot of the title, the names are bassetti, so little basses, or better, esercizi per l'accompagnamento. And here the dictionaries, the terminology of music theory of didactical, sorry, my German is better than English, but didactical, I don't remember the
no,
term.
it's good. Yeah.
Okay. The accompaniment is the right hand. Is not the bass. So esercizi, in order to accompany it, is to accompany the bass. So every part on the bass, intended by figures or not figures. this is the accompaniment. So in the same, you can imagine sonata for the pianoforte with accompaniment of violin, Mozart. So the keyboard remains the main things. Today, in the early music world, we have completely forget this real sense. The harpsichord is the last instrument, not in front, but and less sounding, better is, no? And so, but this was not because harpsichord was the conducting instrument. Why? Because with the plucking is very clear, like now the baton, no? And this with the right hand chords or diminutions, you can keep the orchestra in the tempo of the conductor and to accompany the voices in this case. But all the composition, the voices are the accompaniment of the bass. So what happens in the improvisation? I think you can have a melodic idea, of course, and to give a bass under it. This is the system Bach used in the Lutheran, used the chorals with different basses. You have a cantus firmus of Lutheran liturgical choral, very similar, I think, in principle to the Gregorian choral. It's the same, only is more modern than Gregorian and sometimes more tonal. But they did also with Gregorian hymns. Veni Creator Spiritus, there is the same translated in German choral, and you use like Gregorian. And the Catholic in Germany did the same, and not only in German. But I have here very interesting books, dissertations, very rare to find, about the accompaniment at the organ of Gregorian choral in the Baroque South German lands. And also in Italy, also in Poland, also in France, there was. So Gregorian was always accompanied in principle. In Italy, there was more tradition to alternate the solo singing, but also this is to investigate better, because maybe they alternated a Gregorian accompanied to a cantus figuralis, so with motet, with mass. But so in general, in these 16th century, 17th century partimentos, like these canzonas, we have still a very, as much as possible, strong counterpoint texture, and the composer, anonymous composer, is very interesting. You will see now in the scrolling score. I thank a lot Nicky, because he helped me with the scrolling scores.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
You will see C, A, T, and this is cantus, altus, tenor. So the composer indicates to the organist where to put, in which voice to put the subject of the fugue. And this system was followed, for example, in the Partimento-Fugues by Handel, like Kirchhoff student, together with Kirchhoff in the same moment, student under Zachov. And we will see later some partimentos by Kirchhoff. And so the same system of these canzonas, also Pasquini in his fugues or canzone fugues, or sonatas in Partimento notation. So Partimento was a notation to improve the sense of improvisation, and also to keyboard composition at the keyboard. And because now, for example, Giorgio Pacchioni tells me always that we exaggerate the importance of improvisation. That partimentos were used, of course, as basis of composition. And this is true, because we in conservatory, Italian conservatory of my age, I'm 47, used partimentos with or without numbers, figures, to compose double choirs. And this was the traditional Italian system, to give, there are Fenaroli partimentos realized for orchestra, for quartet, also Hitler gave examples, for two choirs, for two orchestras, for many different scorings. So the Partimento could be Giorgio Pacchioni used my versets to compose in 4 parts in a vocal style, not for keyboard. For example, this Partimento, this Canzonas. So you can use, this is keyboard music, of course, you will see. These are organ lessons, organ composition lessons. But the moment, the passage between organ improvisation, keyboard improvisation to keyboard composition is sometimes very, very short and delicate. This music was played by me. I wrote the realization, my realization, and I change, of course, often during concerts. This is the only recording live. No, not the only. There is also original composition, but this is during a concert last September in Pistoia on a beautiful organ built by Tronci and in part historical and in part modern by Ghilardi. My professor, organ professor Umberto Pineschi, let it build. And during this concert, I played half part of literature, what the historical master called intavolatura, so the written literature, and half part was of my Partimento o esercizi per l'accompagnamento realizations, and in part also original composition in historical style, we will see. So enjoy this Partimento-Canzonas. The audio is not of very good quality.
And later on, perhaps they could go to your YouTube channel and probably hear it in
yes, after this interview. Well, yes.
Okay. All right. Let's play it now. Wow, that's awesome. Wow. Wow.
It's
Okay, this
beautiful
is gonna
music. It's beautiful music, really.
so
I
this is gonna okay, let me just ask a very small question. This is a very silly question, but like how do you get better at reading multiple clefs? I'm sure I mean that was really impressive.
no, this
That
is very important. I think
how do you get
also
better at that? I mean that
also
is so cool to watch. Is it hard was it hard for you to learn how to do that?
no, I did it from my early age because Frescobaldi in the Fiori Musicali preface wrote that the difference between a virtuoso organist and an ignorant organist is to manage the reading of score, and the reading of score is really an important interpretation, fundamental thing. It's very important. You have you can express to sing better the voices in a horizontal way, and each voice has its clef, no? And this is a very easy thing to do. That for people today is difficult. For me, it's very difficult to read the modern tenor clef an octave lower. This quite almost now
Mm.
is after many years I didn't do anymore. I recorded shoots as conductor only in historical clefs, the Spit edition. I recorded the Art of Fugue in an original score. I recorded musical offering, the six-part ricercare in the original keyboard score in six clefs with changing clefs. This for me normal. I studied the Fiori Musicali. For us in Italy was very important. This in the conservatory of my age, and my organ professor wanted it. My harpsichord professor Sergio Bartolo recorded all Frescobaldi works in score, also Art of Fugue, and they wanted. I I must, I might do it. So and all my students, I taught organ 12 years in Bergamo. I taught 8 years in Genoa, and now since 1 year I'm organ composition professor in Venice. And all my students use the score for Frescobaldi and for the works written in keyboard for staves scores or three staves. And this is very important for interpretation. To read Art of Fugue in two systems is completely. You can reach maybe the same. In principle, all is improvisation, all is by memory, by heart. But the horizontal fluency of the polyphony is the most important thing. To see the climax, the ascending climax, and to follow the bel canto singing rule in playing. So the rules are very simple. The messa di voce, so ascending, crescendo, climax is the sforzato, and descending, diminuendo. This is the first bel canto rule. And if you see the polyphony, the vocal polyphony at the keyboard, Fiori Musicali, Capricci, Fantasia by Frescobaldi, Luzzaschi. I recorded Luzzaschi for the first time and the only time. The second book of Ricercari, preserved in Padre Martini library, now in the part still in San Francesco in Bologna in the church. And there is this manuscript that came from Rome. Girolamo Chitti sent to him, and this score in 4 states of the second book, 1578, and the master, the professor of Frescobaldi, and the biggest keyboard counterpoint genius of the second part of the 16th century, I think, in all Europe completely. These 12 ricercari are the most important Ferrarese tradition things before Frescobaldi, and after the ricercari, maybe by Jacques Brumel, the professor of him, organ professor of Luzzaschi, in the Bordeaux Codex in Paris, and also in Vaticano we have some double versions, but in score. So the score, the keyboard score tradition, the score is an invention for keyboard, because composers used score only to compose, but the normal format was a single part for singers. But the organist who couldn't read all the single parts together without bar lines, and this Frescobaldi was a virtuoso. He could read many parts separated together and to play the organ the same. But this was for few persons, of course. And normally, what there were two systems: tabulatura, so to put in a two-hand system, left right, the polyphony divided for hands, or to rewrite in an open score the single parts, one above the other. And this was done to play basso seguente. These canzonas are a solistic example of the basso seguente way. When fugue was doubled, fugue, the keyboard doubled, redoubled the voices in the fugue. And this happened from Josquin times, because Josquin in Ferrara used to sing masses with organ. We have historical sources.
Oh.
And so the organ was the organ in the Western Christian Church, in the Catholic Church, and then in the Lutheran Church. In the Calvinist Church, organ was only permitted for psalms later, and then under influences of Lutheran Germans, North Germans, they started to have big organs in Holland and use them solistically in the Abendmusiken, in the evening concerts in church. But this was another thing. So the Catholic organ became Lutheran and Anglican, but in principle less Calvinist. But why the organ? Because the organ was the instrument to keep the intonation, in order to keep voices, the singers, in tune. And so they doubled the polyphony. The organ that I wrote in my Clavichord 3 recording, I was young, 2005, I wrote that it was destiny of keyboard music, of organ music, to be not in organ style, in keyboard style, because the beginning of organ music is the vocal style. No? Then with légèreté de la main, du main, leggiadria di mano, the lightness, the virtuoso, the fastness of the hand, you could add ornaments like voices. Also, the voices or make trills, ornamentation. But in principle, the meaning of keyboard was to keep in tune the singers. No?
Oh wait, but you jumped. You jumped ahead. So I wanted to ask you. I think you sold me, but how do you do it? How do you learn to play open scores?
Yeah. So first things in Italy is still obligatory, I think. Now
you just do it, is it? Is that what you just do it?
When you are a child, the old system of Italian conservatory is 10 years for keyboard, composition, violin. The first 3 years we have solfeggio. We had solfeggio lessons, and this is rhythmic and so. But we have to read the 7 clefs. We do 7 clefs, but the clefs are much more, and we will see it in Padre Martini and also in Ristori. The clefs are possible to put a G clefs in all 5 lines, F clefs in all 5 lines, the C clefs in all 5 lines. And Padre Martini in the Partimento, we will listen, does it, but did it.
We got to go to. Yeah, we have to go to Saratelli first.
We have to learn it. We have to learn it obligatory, because one could be a viola player, so alto player. One could be a trumpet player with transpositions. So we have to study. What is different from me, that I have to read the clefs together, but this is normal thing for a keyboard player, I think. So organists read also 3 lines for the pedal now. So I don't think it's much more difficult to have a range, a compass out of the 5 lines. So in the normal historical clefs, the meaning is to be in the center of the system, not much out of the system. This is impossible to sing. If you go out of the 5 lines of the pentagram, you have not possibility to sing it, because it is out of the compass of a human voice. And so if you stay in Frescobaldi, in this music, and the essential in Partimento, didactica, in composition, is to use it in our conservatories, in the seventh year exam of composition. You had to compose a fugue in 4 parts, in 4 staves, with historical clefs. Historical. The clefs for me are not historical. Are normal. I compose normally when I compose on this Partimento, I was playing in historical clefs. I used my edition, and I put on the edition soprano clefs, and Giorgio Pacchioni can use only historical clefs. Giorgio Pacchioni composed only fugues in historical. It's impossible for him, also for me. Is another system. To use the violin clefs for is like opera Puccini things, and also Puccini in his fugues under Bazzini, the conservatory, use 4 clefs. So this is completely normal. Now in the European, North European, I think teaching system is not obligatory, but for organists it's obligatory to partitur spiel, to read the score. Then if you do normally or not normally, but in principle you have to do. And I did always during the masses when I played the organ as a liturgical organist for many years. I always put in front of myself, and then I read normally. I prefer to read historical sources than modern editions, because in modern edition very often, yes, there is the critical edition with many comparing of sources, but very often there are more mistakes repeated, and I prefer to go to the original mistake than to the mistake. And then the graphical aspect is very important for interpretation. It's something when you play Frescobaldi toccatas from the intavolatura, always done, always taught, always. Like Sergio Marto, like Francesco Cera, there are persons who did it, who do it. And you have another understanding of the interpretation. I think it's something very subtle, very very esoteric, maybe. But it's also I'm against modern.
I can believe it. No, that sounds good.
I prefer facsimile editions. And,
in fact, when we're going to see now, why don't you explain the Saratelli, the D minor?
Saratelli, very interesting.
They're going to see actually you put the historical score there.
Yes, of course. There is no edition. One student of me now in Venice is working on a modern edition of the Partimentos or Esercizi per l'accompagnamento by Saratelli. He's the San Marco organist, and so maybe will be ready soon an edition. Saratelli was from Bologna. There are many misunderstandings, many false things in the articles about him. He was, I discovered without any doubt, in the archive of the Cathedral of Bologna, the baptism of Saratelli, and this is the year, so 1684. In Bologna, there is a portrait in the collection of portraits of Padre Martini by him, and he was in the second part of his life. He went from Bologna to Venezia and Padova, to Padova and Venezia, and he was an organist in San Marco, and was also chapelmaster, and was a very good teacher in the Mendicanti Hospital in Venice. So what happens? There are articles about the tradition of Partimento in Venice, in Veneto. Yes, there is a tradition of Partimento in Veneto, but it's completely Bolognese. And the other Partimento, we have not Partimentos by him, but for sure he was the most important professor, Francesco Gasparini. Francesco Gasparini was student in Bologna under Giovanni Paolo Colonna and under Pasquini in Rome. Pasquini was from Tuscany and spent his early years in Ferrara. So in Ferrara there was a strong Frescobaldi tradition. I think that we don't know about the the teachers in Ferrara by Pasquini of Pasquini, but maybe I think that the Frescobaldi student or influenced by Frescobaldi, Battiferri could be one of the teacher of the very young Pasquini. So the tradition of Partimento in Venice is completely from Pasquini. So the Emilia, Bologna, Ferrara. Ferrara is a church state, was in that moment like Bologna, so very near. And Saratelli wrote this Esercizi. The most important copy is in the library of Venice Conservatory, where I teach, and is dated 1732. These are very important pieces in the Bologna school way, so manner, how every partimentos, every exercises are numbered, figured, like the Estense Modena copy of Martini Partimentos, like Padre Mattei, like Vignali Partimentos, but like Palmerini, student of Mattei Partimento. But in the manuscript of Padre Martini, we will see there are no figures. This is the highest level of Partimento. Saratelli in the theoretical part of this work explained that the best is to write without figure, but we use figure because this is more easy for the less advanced students. So, and these partimentos are in 24 keys, and this is very important of the Bologna tradition. Also in Naples, of course, but maybe a little bit. And this is also important for the temperament, because maybe Bologna was very near something equal temperament in that age. Rome was the capital of Bologna at that moment, and Rome completely was a city where in the string keyboard instrument, equal temperament was known. Maybe very difficult to do, and for conservatorism was not good, but it was known and used. So we have 24 keys like Matteson, and all students had to practice in 24. The same moment of Das Wohltemperierte Klavier, in the moment in which the two tones became modulated in every finalis of the 12 notes keyboard scale octave, and so we listened to Saratelli. Saratelli was a maestro in Venice. Also, we have also beautiful solfeggi in Venice by him, and how to do. I did it like a toccata. Of course, this Partimento in the minor is very interesting because there are rests on the beat and notes on the upbeat, and this is like suspirations a little bit, but are quite long. The Partimento by Saratelli, and we have the structure of Bologna school partimentos. We have a theme, a subject, a sequence, a modulation, and a ritornello of the same in the new key. No? And this happens in Padre Martini pieces, in Padre Mattei pieces, in Palmerini pieces, and then another peculiarity of Bologna school partimentos is that we don't have soprano concertante parts. We will see that in Ristori we have a part written for the treble of the keyboard. Here we have only bass, and everything is to invent from the bass in order to accompany the bass. Okay? So let's listen to this toccata. So I tried to make a two-part texture, like a keyboard, a violin, a continuo, because the normal style of this age in Italy of keyboard is to play two parts, fundamental two parts, a bass and a violin in the right hand, and sometimes, like Gasparini in Venice told the wrote in the Armonico Pratico al Cimbalo, to give the botte delle consonanze, the striking of the chords of the harmonies in the left or also in between the hands. So we can have also 10 full voice, no? Full voice Vollstimmigkeit, full voice accompaniment, but the parts singing are two, soprano and bass. And here I played two parts because I tried to be faster, and in the near the cadences, of course, was normal to give more harmony. No? So to play this, sometimes I do chords, big chords, also in strict position of the left hand. This was typical Italian, and this could be a mistake of a good style in the composition of northern schools, but in Italy you use the hand full, no? Full, but in order to feel these two parts, and this is the very simplification who happens in Italy. That happened after the stilus antiquus or the learned style we listen in the canzonas. We don't have any more really an importance of counterpoint, so with so independent voices like at the Frescobaldi age. Frescobaldi was maybe the last, but we have still a little bit during the 17th century these in these canzonas in Pasquini, but after and after less and less. Only the Lutherans preserved this Catholic tradition in order to be more Catholic than Catholic, the counterpoint. So Bach wrote a book of ricercari in an open score in 4 staves, and this book of modern ricercari on the same subject was called by Marburg Die Kunst der Fuge, the art of fugue. But this was a Clavichord and an answer to Frescobaldi. The last Bach is Latin, is more Catholic in sense of ecumenical. The Mass, he had no problem to play maybe the organ in Catholic Church of Leipzig. We know when the King of Poland arrived to Leipzig, so there were no problem. In the Catholic Church of Leipzig, they used the same chorals, the same of the Lutheran of Leipzig, the same German chorals, von Meloch, with text by Luther, often in the Catholic Church. So in this, we have the Frescobaldi, post-Frescobaldi tradition was kept taken by Germans, South Germans, Pachelbel, Bach. This good, and the toccatas, and also the counterpoint tradition of Frescobaldi, of the fiori musicali, of the capricci, Froberger, Kerl, Muffat in part, and then of course Krieger, Kirchhoff also, we will see. So Saratelli is a much lighter composer in the modern Baroque, so late Baroque style of the violin, of the soprano voice, of the singing of the opera, and I did it like a toccata in order to don't be too much boring.
Okay, let's go. Fantastic. Really, really fantastic. You know,
Thank you.
actually, should we bring up the F major Saratelli?
Yes, yes,
Why don't you just speak about that really quickly while I bring up the F major one? And
yes.
we'll have to
The
move on
F
to
major,
Padre Martini.
the F major is I tried to show another typical Italian way to realize a bass, a bassetto, a partimento, an exercise, a continuo. So in trio manner, two violins, a three-part texture. This I'm always a little bit Bach influenced, so I try to be counterpointal in my approach, and so sometimes too much for Italians of that age, for Italian keyboardists of that age, because they were much more rigorous in vocal writing than in instrumental writing. In this case, I played two parts, two sopranos, but the second soprano could be also an alto, and obbligato. And I created figura corta, yam pa pa pam pam pa, little bit like a menuet, something like a menuet or an andante. And the bass is an exercise on the alternation of four, the dissonance 4 to the dissonance of 9, the ninth. So 4, 3, 9, 8. And so the bass at lips, a fifth up, a degree, a step motion ascending, another fifth, a step motion. And there is an exception to the figures. I don't care about the Saratelli figure in the cadences. When you write 4, 5, for reason of beauty, of contrapuntal reason, I can realize what I prefer from a bass, of course. This was the meaning of the sense of this exercise. I give the 4/6 cadence, so 4/6, and not 4/5. This is the only exception to the numbers I made in this realization.
And there he is, Saratelli.
Saratelli, yes. Saratelli is his portrait in the collection of Padre Martini, yes. Where is
Wow.
written Saratelli from Bologna. Many biographies tell that is not. There is a controversy about the origins. There is no controversy. It's from Bologna, and there is also the age in the portrait, and he's very old in the portrait. So, and he was there is music, sacred music by him also in Vienna, in Prague, in Berlin, something. And he was very, very appreciated in Venice and in Padova for his sacred works. Very cantabilissimo, very singing. Very, and then this the first late Baroque, the oldest late Baroque collection of partimentos we have from Bologna, I think. Of the 18th century, yes, because Martini, we will listen.
Yes, Martini now, B minor.
This Martini came from an organ composition improvisation method that are sketches in a manuscript HH36 in Bologna, in the Museo della Musica, in the library of Martini. And is very important. There are alternation of organ compositions, mostly in 2 parts or 3 parts, with very fast right hand, and alternation of partimentos without numbers for very few figures, very sparse. But and these are manuscript, handwritten, and these are lessons of organ in order to become organist, to have a church place where to an honorary a working place, and this Partimento in B minor is very interesting because he is also a solfeggio in some way, because is for sure an exercise in order to learn to read much more than 7 clefs. You will see that there are G clefs on the first, and this is the French violin clef. But there is G clef also on the third line. There is a F clef on the fifth, on the fourth, on the third, on the second. So there are, I think, 9 or 10 different clefs. Of course, many clefs are the same of others, but you have to read it, to think to something. Again, here, a 2-part texture, like a sonata, allegro from a sonata. The bass is jumping with lips, and I did it I posted it yesterday in Facebook or 2 days ago. This as a preview of our speech, but I wanted to give a flavor, a Bachian flavor, kind of flavor. Why? Because from 1735, Martini knew for sure Handel's suites. We have a copy in Bologna, the Martini copy, and the first part of Clavichord, so the 6 partitas by Bach. For sure, he knew these 2 works before 35, when he started to compose his so-called Amsterdam 12 sonatas, that are the only Italian answer to the Middle German keyboard idiom, where the influences of Bach and Handel, mostly Handel, but also Bach, are very strong. And he finished to compose them in 38, and was unlucky because the many problems with the edition in Amsterdam, Michel Lessen, and they finished to engrave them in 42. But the sonatas are of the young Martini. I think also these partimentos, these sketch, these exercises, organ composition exercises, improvisation, are of the same age, 35, 38, 39, from the graphy and from the and there are samples of organ sonata for post communio, for elevation, for offertory, toccatas for the beginning and the ite missa est, at the end of the mass of the liturgy, and there are also these partimentos, and these are not studied by scholars, not yet. I saw them since my my childhood,
Yeah.
and there is another manuscript attributed to Martini in Modena. I told before, with beautiful partimentos, also fugues, in 24 keys, like Saratelli. And this partimento was again performed by me again on the harpsichord, Italian harpsichord, built by Romain Legros. Now that is for the Conservatory of Venice, where I was recording this during lessons or after lessons, in some free moments. So enjoy it.
Okay, so let's go. Amazing, amazing. You know, could you talk about Martini and Rameau? Because
yes, this
that's
is
a
an important
very,
question.
very
This is
important question.
there is some literature on it, on this argument, but in principle, when the Rameau theories of fundamental base of the inversion of chords arrived to Italy, and the first most important follower of these theories was Padre Vallotti, also Franciscan, in Padua. So Padua is 1 hour from Bologna now, so 111, 110 kilometers. And Martini was reacting bad. Martini was not interested, like every learned and practical musician, to the Rameau system. There is a Bach document. I love Rameau as composer, of course, but Rameau didn't compose after his harmonic theories. He composed after the basso continuo system. Then I know that there was a polemic about my words in the last first interview. We'll speak a little bit about it, but I'm a completely liberal person, not are different ways to see, you could tell me, the same phenomenon, but it's not really so simple. There is a Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach document where he wrote, I think, to Forkel, if I remember. I and my father, as every good musician, are against Rameau. So what means against the theory of traité d'harmonie réduit à ses principes naturels? Not against Rameau. Bach was influenced, of course, by Rameau, les sons, les suites pour les classes. Maybe the partitas are also an answer not only to Scarlatti, very brilliant keyboard style, but also to Rameau. So but the system the interpretation of the musical world, musical system. Like I call with my students, and I'm very happy to teach practical music, because I'm also a musicologist. I know very good musicology, and maybe I'm musicology, but the musicology for me has sense when it helps to understand better music that is, first of all, a practical phenomenon. But in any case, Rameau make jus naturalism. How is in English? Jus.
Natural science, something like that.
In philosophy, jus naturalism. Moment, because it's a discipline. But this is I check.
Yeah.
This is very important. But maybe yes, doctrine of natural law. Yes. In harmony. So this is a theoretical thing. There is a triad composed by 2/3, and from this triad, with a third, minor, major, and a fifth, you can inverse everything, and you will have everything in the language of common practice. This may be true, of course, but the sense of it is a theoretical one, is to find a rational, typical French, the French encyclopedic mentality, rationalist, to find a law in order to understand phenomena. But these are very few to do with a musician at the keyboard who has to compose an opera in 10 days. So what is important? To learn, and we know from Partimento practice, Partimento studies now, very, very, it's a fashion now. And so what we know, that they studied at the keyboard, and this until later, until 1930, 1940. And then classical musicians didn't do anymore, but jazz musicians do it. Organist has to do it. Organist maintains more tonality, maybe. Also in the Protestant in England, there is not strange to compose neotonally, or in Scandinavia. In the Central European world, after avant-garde, after Stravinsky, but after Schoenberg, after the 12-tone music, is very, after develops of it, is very difficult. I compose in a neo-modal, neotonal language that is maybe the same language Ulrich, Satie, Debussy, Ravel, Bartók, the first Bartók, Fauré was the first Mussorgsky, but also the jazz language is this. Keith Jarrett, one of the biggest genius. The Clavichord CDs of Keith Jarrett are between the best recordings never heard in my life. The Book of Waves, I suggest to listen Book of Waves on the clavichord, on 2 or 3 clavichords also together, are improvisation in every possible way. Also in Bach, in Louis Couperin, in French Baroque way, in a neo-Indian way, in American. I'm not an expert of popular music, but so what happens? We know if there is a number, a figure, we have 5, 6. In that moment, we know that the bass must make a ascending stepwise motion of 1 degree. We have 4 sharp, barred 4, we know that the bass make a descending step motion. We have a 7. The bass has to jump a 5th down. We have so when, and so the of course there was in Facebook you showed me a polemic against my words. There is a functionality. I appreciate a lot at the university. I studied the functional harmony at university, and this was an harmony much more interesting, I think, that the degrees harmony of the French school, because there is a function of a tonic, dominant, subdominant, dominant. 3 functions, but there are still the figures of continuo in these 3 functions. So there is the parallel of the tonic, the parallel of the subdominant, but all these, like the Rameau system, because this is a consequence of Rameau system, of inversion of a triad, is very fascinating, but is theoretical, is analytical. I think after 12-tone music, there is it's very important to study music analysis, because when you arrive to a system so maybe was impossible to be better than Brahms, no? And there is a search for new patterns, new influences. So the neo-Gregorian fashion of Solesme created some in France a new language, modal language, but much more. And this Coquelin explains very good. This very good composer and also very bizarre man, and also incredible writer of method of composition, counterpoint, harmony, of everything, and of orchestration. Coquelin tells us that Fauré was influenced in the modality, the neo-modality, by the Gregorian chant, but also by the Mussorgsky, the Russian modality in Western Europe, the bipolarity between extreme West France and between extreme East Russia, no? And of course, this neo-modal language I like a lot when I improvise for myself, not in historical style. Maybe we listen something of this fruit, but I love the diatonic Shostakovich, for example, the diatonic things by Shostakovich, by Stravinsky, the diatonic style, the pandiatonic style. Pandiatonic is a consequence of traditions, popular tradition, folk tradition, and of Gregorian Solesme singing. But of course, the Rameau system is theoretical. In France, in this beautiful book I have here in original copy, that this is a traité, Panseron, student of Padre Mattei, a friend of Rossini, professor of harmonie pratique at the Paris Conservatory. Harmonie pratique. So what happens in this incredible book? You can find online. The first part is all Rameau system of harmony. So the triads, the inversions, the degrees. Then the second part, there are the exercices d'harmonie pratique au piano. At the keyboard, you play the partimentos, the basses, he called basses, and there is Fenaroli, Cotumacci, Leo, Mattei, and with numbers, and realized in a more academic 19th century way. So which is 3 against 1, no? 3. The scoring is 4-part scoring normally, sometimes also 3 parts, but rigorously always 4 or always 3. And this is is a consequence of the general bass system of the Germans, of the French. Italians were not so coherent, so rigorous. They used normally 2 parts, like in my Saratelli, or 3 parts. Also, Padre Matteo, there are some. We published, me and my friend Peter Vantua published this little book in Sweden. He prepared the edition. I wrote the preface, but I suggest to give to publish also 3 realizations, maybe made by Mattei himself, of his partimentos, and they are rigorously in 2 violins and bass. So the right hand is like my Saratelli, not so florid, so diminished, a little bit more standing, more vocal, but very high. Also, I don't find my copy here. Maybe it's in Venice in my conservatory, but are the little bases by Mattei with my preface about Partimento stuffs things and Bolognese school of Partimento with some interesting, I think, informations. But in any case, what happened? We have in Panseron really many important things. Panseron tells how to learn to do a good Partimento. Bass, it's called the same. Look to Bach. Learn by memory all Bach fugues and preludes and fugues. Learn Handel music, Scarlatti keyboard music. He tells in romantic age. Learn Kramer studies and Kramer music. Learn Clementi Gradus ad Parnaso with beautiful canons and fugues. Learn Kozeluk. Learn Kalkbrenner. Learn Liszt. And he tells, I was reading...
Liszt? Okay.
Remember that Liszt, Kalkbrenner, Chopin, all know Bach, Handel perfectly. If not, they are not Liszt and Handel. So, imitation of models. And this is, of course, the most important thing in everything, from a child with parent, but in music, the imitation of models. And so it tells, in order to do good Cotumacci, Leo, Fenaroli, look at Bach. So maybe my Martini, also my Saratelli in some way, there are movements of right hands I have unconsciously taken by my practice with Bach music since I was 4 years. But of course, I could write also in a more Italian, so more simple way, no? But Panseron tells the same. So there is a transnational language, no? of keyboard style, but keyboard style is one of the styles. The goal is to write for orchestra, for voices, a mass, for church, an opera, or a big mass. So we spoke about it many times. Why to stop to organ composition? I'm professor for organ and organ composition because in Italy, in my school days, was obligatory in organ to write counterpoint in post-Fugue system. So with cantus firmus in the highest part, in the lowest part, in 3 parts. Counterpoint for us organists was enough in 3 parts, not in 4. Composers in 4 and also 8 for us organists in 3 parts. Then in the next exam, we had to compose a 2-part fuguetta, not a fugue, a big fugue, a fuguetta for keyboard, for organ. And in the final exam, we had to compose a 3-part fuguetta for organ and a motet for voice and organ. And of course, to accompany Gregorian chant and to read at first sight open score in 4 clefs, to modulate, to make a first sight reading with pedal and other things. but the composition, and this was the minimum that our Sicilian organist, so Bossi, Ravanello, Tebaldini, decided for a church organist was important to do. And so now there is, and this is very dangerous, in all Europe, we taken also in Italy the Hochschule system, the European system, so Anglo-Saxon system, and the composition part that every organist has to do is not anymore made by the organ professor. There is a separation, typical modern separation of competencies in hyper competencies. But now most of professor composition in Europe are post-avant-garde composers.
Post avant-garde, not even avant-garde.
Post the 12-tone system. So there are so many styles and so many influence currents. So I'm not expert of it, but they don't know really how to teach to write a correct, a nice for part or part fugue, or a double choir, a motet, or also a quartet could be a problem. So if you because this is academic exercise, and this could be an academic exercise, but is a fantasy developed exercise, no? And so and is a technique exercise. In order to be good in something, you have to have technique, no? Also to cook, no? There is a technique, and the technique is important in order to develop the capacity to express yourself, no? in every language. So what happens in my case? I started as organ and organ composition professor in 2002, and now I'm professor for organ because it changed the system in Italy. But in Bergamo, in Genova, and in Venice, I asked to the rectors to teach myself the organ composition, and not the
post avant-garde.
But no, they are very good, and then there are exceptions, of course, always. But what happens that after the destruction of tonals of common practice language and didactic, so there are methods in the organ late 19th century Italian organ world, organ composition method made by organists that are completed. They use partimentos taken from Bach music. And the model of fugue teaching is not the Bolognese school or Naples school together mixed, result in what? In Cherubini. Cherubini was student of Sarti. Sarti was student of Martini and Vallotti. So there is a tradition of the Italian vocal fugue teaching from Bologna school to Cherubini, from Cherubini to Dubois, from Dubois to Gedalge. Is it the school fugue of Paris? No? We did a much more interesting, I find, keyboard fuguetta, that is where everything is possible, like in Bach. In Bach there is freedom. Bach uses counter subject when he needs. Very often, mostly keyboard fugue by Bach, there is no the same counter subject every time. So this is a completely another is instrumental fugue, but also Padre Martini in the Padre Paolucci treatise, l'arte pratica di contrappunto. Martini wrote the contrapunto treatise because he was a little bit angry that every lessons by him to Paolucci became a book before. So Martini, the same happened with Gradus ad Parnassum with Clementi. Clementi wrote the Gradus ad Parnassum very angry with his student Kramer because Kramer wrote the 100 studies before,
Mhm.
and he told, this is my system, my didactic school, and I write now my work. The same made Martini with Padre Paolucci. Padre Paolucci write very interesting footnotes about German keyboard fugue by Bach, Handel, about Rameau, about Scarlatti. And there is a distinction between the instrumental style from the... So, in the Partimento is an instrumental... The Partimento for solo keyboard is an instrumental style. So we have to use hands and not voices, because the vocal counterpoint rules of Zerlino are different from what happens in Frescobaldi e Ricercate, because to sing a leap, a sixth ascending leap, is very difficult to sing, not to play. So after what happens? They started to play it, and then it became common also in the concertante solo vocal style to be like an instrument violin. No? And the rules change. What is the history of composition of music? Is how to tell? Is to become always is a history of the dissolution of rules that become increasingly less rigid. No? You understand? And what I don't like, for example, of the Rameau, this is very difficult to explain, but of the Rameau theory's consequences in the composition. Maybe I tell false things. It's my opinion, but the use always less rigid of the fourth sixth chord is a consequence of a vision after which the inversion of the triad becomes the second inversion is the fourth. So in the Romantic, in the 19th century, we have always more and more used without preparation of the fourth sixth, for example. This maybe is only a fashion, only a new develop of. But the Rameau is the second degree of the octave rule. In some very late harmony treatises, I didn't study the degrees harmony because my professor let me bassi continui to write accompanying above and chorals to write under the voices. And then, of course, we did a Fuchs counterpoint. So the figures, the basso continuo system, is a very fast way to think still counterpointally. The Rameau system, Martini didn't accept. Also Bach. Of course, the lessons in Austria was a little bit different because the Padova influences the Mozart lessons to Etude, General Bassübungen. They explain the inversion of the chords, but then Mozart used, I think, composed not. This is only explication of the basis. There is a triad, there are inversions, but I tell always, joking, that a 5 chord is the opposite of a 6 chord. The only common thing is the third. So, but it's a little bit like men and the women. No? So if on a C I play 5 or I play 6, then you can think that the 6 is inversion, the first inversion of the A minor. But this has nothing to do with improvisation. And when I compose in my modern for me, but because I'm a Bach fan, but I'm not modern for my avant-garde or post-avant-garde colleagues. I'm a baroque composer. When I play Prelude, I write madrigals or Prelude and Fugues in a more modern idiom. That is post Stravinsky, Shostakovich, Satie, Debussy, Ravel languages, jazz, that are the same. Jazz is this. Jazz is Bartok, is Fuga, is Debussy, is Satie, Ravel, in Gershwin. No? In this, there is a free use of dissonance. Free use of dissonance, the center, the functions of Riemann, the tonic function, subdominant, dominant function, these are anymore present. You have to hidden a sense of functionality, no? Also in the modality, neo-modal, neo-tonal music. And this is very interesting because this creates a change of horizon. But I think always to numbers from the bass. Really, I don't know. Maybe I think you can speak about quartal harmony, of tertial harmonies. I have this very nice book of Persichetti, Vincent Persichetti, the harmony of in the translation. Of course, he thinks always like inversions, no, from a fundamental base, and for me, it's sometimes also a little bit difficult to understand. But in my hands, what happens? Normally, my compositions came from my hands. From the last, I'm writing a cycle of Lieder in Neo-Latin, on Neo-Latin verses, and most are written recording improvisation and rewriting my improvisation, correcting, elaborating. But you think to the interval from the bass, like in the Berlino counterpoint, like in the counterpoint of Fuchs, like in the counterpoint of Durante, of Leo, of Padre Martini, of Bach, of Kirchhoff, of Panseron. Panseron explains the inversions, explains the degrees. For example, why the question of the 5/6 on the subdominant. In the French system, modern system of harmony, they see a 7 chord on the second degree in the first inversion. No? And this is, of course, logical, mathematical. But Hugo Riemann in the functional harmony is much more interesting because it tells that the function, the sense, is of subdominant with an added 6. So it's not a second degree, it's a fourth degree. And this is much more near to the continuo mentality, no? My students, I taught many years harpsichord in the basso continuo, also in the Bergamo Conservatory, and so the six ajouté of Rameau, of course, is I think that the analysis system is analytical, but the predominance of analysis on practice after the avant-garde and the new composition systems is the reason why people today, I don't know, but in European conservatories, there are the harmony classes in group, and they write on paper a chord harmonization, no? Or a bass harmonization. They don't stay at the keyboard to learn from fingers the movements, no? And so improvisation is this, to imitate and to have formulas in the also for Rameau, that was an excellent harpsichord player and opera composer, and there is the continuo system in his written music. Rameau wanted to found a theoretical system, and this had many consequences on the history of musical theories, but not so much in the practical musicianship. I think. And then there was a fusion between. But when there is a predominance of the analytical system, we have lost all the practical attitude. Jazz players are still able to improvise. Most of classical pianists not.
No.
Why? Because they didn't study Panseron. They didn't study the classes of practical harmony at the keyboard. That in Italy, in Italian conservatories of 19th century, there were three names normally: Partimento, the class, or numerica, so figuring, numbering, or accompagnamento. So this was not, I think also in the Sanguinetti book, Art of Partimento, there are quotations about the very strong reactions of Italian teachers, maestri, against the penetration of the French harmonical system in the didactical world, music world, so in the conservatory. And why? Because this is really something of philosophical and not of practical. So when you can also make theories of kitchen, of cuisine, but then you have to produce the bread, to produce pasta, to produce, and the musician make the same. No? Are practical artists. They are normally not very deep intellectual. They are artists. They create beauty with the sound, and then there are also the intellectual of music, of course. But Bach was not an intellectual of music. This idea, modern idea, that Bach is the Pythagorean, is completely false. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, in another famous document, tell me and my father, as every real musician, are very far from the arid, I don't know, the dry demonstrations of the mathematicians in music. And this is against Rameau, of course, and against the theorists. Many treatises were written by not excellent musicians. This is a very important point. We know, but the most of musical treatises, there are exceptions. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, Turk is an incredible musician, I think. Coquelin. But for example, Di Ruta is for us keyboard players incredible, of fundamental important. But he was not Merulo. He was a student of Merulo. But Merulo is the genius, no? And Merulo has not time, didn't want to write treatises because he was much stronger in the practice, and tells Carl Philipp in this, we are distant from mathematical demonstrations, but much more strong in practical music. So this is very important, and this is the difference between the French post-Rameau is not Rameau. I love Rameau, really. It's not a Rameau problem. It's a consequence of didactic theoretical theory after Rameau. And French is very systematical. No? France is very systematical. The approach of French mentality in every discipline is rationalist, enlightenment, and very, and these they are also in the figuring of continuo. They use one system. Germans use more systems because sometimes they are French influenced, sometimes are Italian. But Italy has not used. We were strong in practice, but there were many differences. So the Naples and Bologna school are the same, of course, the same moment, the same language. there were public conservatories in Naples. There were church conservatories, private monasteries in Bologna. No, but this is much different, of course. And the practical musicians in Naples were opera composers. Durante not, but other, yes, of course. And in Bologna there was Padre Martini, but before Martini there was Francesco Passarini. That was maybe one of my relatives. Yes, really. And but there was Saratelli. Yes, my grandmother is Passarini and came from maybe from a brother of him. But a
That's cool.
Franciscan again, and but I'm Lutheran. They were Franciscan, but there was a tradition of singing Bernacchi. There was Saratelli in Venice. There were Ristori was born in Vienna, I discovered, but maybe studied in the Bologna school. We don't know how, where. I didn't find documents, but he wrote for Vivaldi, the first Vivaldi opera, when he was 19, and then he went to as organist of the Polish chapel in Dresden, in Warsaw, in Moscow, and so and he used a system. The Ristori Partimentos are beautiful. There is a mixture of language between Naples, because he was also in Naples for some period to write operas, and maybe was guest of Porpora, I think, or in any case of a famous Naples chapelmaster. And there is an influence between the Naples keyboard idiom, the Venice Vivaldi concerto style, the Bologna continuo tradition, that is the same language. One of the fruits of Bologna school is Corelli, for example. The trio style is Corelli style. The Partimento in Bologna remains in three voices, in principle, the Corelli way. Handel was very influenced by Corelli, of course. Locatelli, Gemignani, Veracini. Corelli was like Petrarca in poetry, no? A little bit. And this is a product of the Bologna school. So, but the difference between Bologna and Naples, there are not differences. There are not differences in general. The difference is with Bach system, that there is a less systematical Partimento approach with the Lutheran cantus firmus choral. So the chant donné, cantus datus, canto dato. So you have to harmonize, you have to write a continuo under the choral. And then you build after the two inner parts, alto and tenor. You have the choral, you write a bass with figures, and then you can create a 3+1 or 2+2, a choral scoring, no, the position, and but this the different Bach approach. That there is importance of cantus firmus of Volkslieder. This is very important. But in principle, Bologna and Naples are similar. But Naples we have concertante part of Partimentos. In Bologna, not. So there are little things, and the languages, there are harmonies that in Naples are more favored. Bologna is a little bit more conservative, more church style, because it was a school of priests. Naples not. No? So there are. So we can listen now. Martini.
Yeah, let's
in
maybe
trio. In trio, this C major, always from the same manuscript, HH36 in Bologna, is really without figures, only one flat or one sharp, something like that. And but it's a Corelli style bass, completely a basso passeggiato, so a walking bass. And I decided to play this like an organ andante, like an elevation, a little bit in Martini style, but always with a little bit a Bachian flavor. And I had no figure, and I could do what I preferred. And sometimes my Bach influence is, of course, evident.
Okay, let's give it a shot here. Wonderful. Why don't you talk a little bit about the A minor fugue while I bring it up?
Also in the same manuscript, we have some Partimento-Fugues, and of course, these are sketch in order to learn the fugue structure, to improvise during the mass. A typical moment for the fugues were, of course, the offertory. After a toccata beginning, they played often a fugue, and this is a sketch. I tried to render a little bit more substantial. The hand, I had a pedal, Orgelpunkt in German. So, and I tried to follow the structure of the Martini Partimento, and this played again on the organ of the concert hall of the Venice Conservatory, and this time I play in 16 foot compass, so 1 octave lower because there is a counter octave in the bass.
Okay, let's hear it. Fantastic. Now,
Thank you very much.
you mentioned Ristori, right? So
Yes.
now he's the next person we're going to bring up. So
Yes. So there's a link. This link between the Bologna, Dresden, Naples, and this fantastic book of Esercizi per l'accompagnamento, written for his student that were noble girls of the Saxon court, Saxon Polish court, and Maria Walpurgis, for example. And we know that Ristori taught not only the poor cantores, the Kapellenknaben of the Catholic Dresden court, because Dresden became Catholic in order to have the Polish kingdom, and he was a church composer mostly. I have written also it. I think he was in touch with Sebastian Bach.
Really?
One,
Okay.
I think for reasons I have written and I'm investigating, and I think that there was a connection between him, Porpora, and Bach. But I
Really?
will.
Wow.
Yes. There is a late French document who could let me think about a visit of Porpora, listening, playing clavichord, Bach playing clavichord, and Ristori was the common person who presented Bach to Porpora. And the Porpora arrived to Germany, was very surprised that every Germans used the clavichord and not harpsichord. This instrument in Italy was forgotten after Frescobaldi age, after Seconda Pratica age, because it was not enough loud to accompany voices, no? Play with singers, and was a very intimate domestic instrument, and was a typical Renaissance instrument of the courts, of the private musicianship and training, but in Germany remained as the most expressive keyboard instrument, able to imitate voice, string instrument, vibrato, crescendo, diminuendo. But the problem of clavichord was, of course, the volume, very low. And Porpora, I think Porpora, was surprised that Germans used clavichord. And there is this testimony, French testimony, about clavichord. There was a famous Italian Kapellmeister who arrived to Germany and was surprised about the persistent use of clavichord in Germany. Another famous Italian Kapellmeister, since many years living in Germany, took him to Sebastian Bach, the father of the famous Carl Philipp Emanuel, and Bach was very, very, very kind and started to improvise the clavichord. And after the first prelude, the Italian famous Kapellmeister, I think Porpora, and Ristori was there. Porpora visited Dresden around 1731, or 32 maybe. That was the year in which Bach went to Dresden to play Zibema organ, and so it could be this could happen in Dresden also, not in Leipzig. But in any case, after this prelude, Bach started with solo aria, the clavichord with solo right hand, and the Italian famous Kapellmeister was crying and took Bach and told, this is not the worst of the instrument, but the king of all instruments, or the queen. And this is a very clear testimony quoted by a French Jesuit. But there is the Sebastian Bach name, and I think that could be Ristori. Ristori had a student, Peter August, the copyist of these partimentos. You see now the calligraphy of Peter August. That was a Polish child found in the forest without parents, and adopted by Peter, the Russia emperor, and August, the Polish of Poland, the king of Poland. They were together in the forest, and Peter August was given to Ristori for musical education. So he was the Hauptkopist, the principal copist of the Dresden Court in that moment. And we have a beautiful copy in Dresden by him of Das Wohltemperierte Klavier by Bach. So I think that there is, and very interesting, the sister of Peter August, if I remember well, I made some investigation. The sister of Peter August was the wife of Casanova, Giacomo Casanova.
Oh, okay.
And so there is a link again between Venice and Dresden. So this Partimento is another exercise to read the clefs. In this case, the baritone clefs, the French violin clefs, so the G clef on the first line, and the mezzo soprano clef. And these are the most difficult clefs to read. And of course, and the Partimento is has some moments of concerto manner, concertato style, with the upper part, the violin, solo violins, or violin with second violin or viola, written down. And when there is the continuo is in Bologna tradition, so you have to invent the texture. And it's a very, very, very allegro, fast Partimento, and I tried to use as much as possible a two-part writing alternated to some the progressions, some trio manners. But I suggest, if you want to have a better look to the Ristori Partimentos, to listen 14 Partimentos. I realized I recorded live, and you can find it in YouTube. And there are 14, and I'm preparing a complete recording of the Partimentos by Ristori. There are beautiful pieces, very short but beautiful pieces with a mixture, half hybrid style between intavolatura, so written down keyboard music, and Partimento, so to feel, to invent, to improvise, to compose above the bass. So we try to listen.
Wow. Wow. Awesome.
This is made for you because in the 14 Partimentos in YouTube was not yet realized. But there are 28 pieces, so now I have made more than half. But when I have time,
I'll put the link. I'm going to put the link to the YouTube performance so people can check that out. Now, you said clavichord. You had a great anecdote about the clavichord. Now we have Kirchhoff. Is that right?
Kirchhoff. Kirchhoff was Kirchhoff. Gottfried Kirchhoff was a student together with Handel of Zachhoff, and in Halle. And when Bach candidated for the organist tenure place in Halle, Bach won the competition, but Bach didn't accept the place in order to have more money. He didn't was not happy with the honorary, and so Kirchhoff became organist in the market church of Halle instead of Bach. And but the two men were they knew each other because Contius, this great organ builder, very esteemed by Bach himself, built an organ under the project of Kirchhoff, and Bach, together with Johann Kuhnau, was one of the people who make the proofing of the organ. And so in that occasion they had. We know that the so-called Langlotz manuscript, that is maybe a Kirchberger school stuff, full of fugues, Partimento-Fugues. There are many of the fugues in a little bit different versions from the ABC Musicale. We have only one copy found in Petersburg of the ABC Musicale, but this was printed by the Lutheran organist in Holland, in Amsterdam, Huit, and the ABC Musicale is a book in 22, I think. I don't remember 22 keys, not 24, in order to build prelude and fugues for organ or harpsichord or clavichord, of course. Clavichord was the most important training practice instrument for Middle German organist, Central German organist, they are interesting pieces. Maybe this Langlotz manuscript was a manuscript with stuffs Bach used during the lessons of continuo and partimento, so improvisation. And these pieces by Kirchhoff are with figures, like in Bologna, differently from Naples, but Padre Martini privately didn't use numbers, you have seen. And these are very interesting pieces. I think you can do what you want. So in this was made really in a simple way during a lesson. One of my students in Bergamo, the clavichord of the Bergamo Conservatory, and the fugue was not very elaborated. I didn't think too much. It was after a lesson. I fixed that lesson recording with my iPhone. Also, the quality of the audio is worse. Then we listen a Prelude and Fugue. That is my last stuff of this phase. Prelude and Fugue by Kirchhoff, played on the organ in a Saxon way. So the Prelude in trio for two sopranos and continuo. The two sopranos are played by two hands on the two manuals of a German-style organ, and the pedal played continuo, so the Partimento line. And the fugue is in 4 parts, realized, where the beginning of the bass entry is the last bass part is played by pedals, and there is a moment manualiter, so without pedal, and I alternate I think in an interesting way the suggestions of Kirchhoff. So you can do in this clavichord Prelude and Fugue. I suggest to listen one after the other.
Okay.
The prelude is in general mostly in 2 parts again, and I've tried to make imitations of the bass line, but you can do in many different way. Of course, it needs unending possibility. And the fugue is really like improvisation. The second of the organ is written down, and of course also practice, because it's not too easy to play. Thank you.
Very, very nice. Very nice. Let me bring up the organ now for the Kirchhoff.
Yes, the organ is one of the partimentos I consider my best
Wow. Okay.
contributions. But not the music is not so interesting. I find that sometimes they are a little. There are exceptions to the figuring. Sometimes I don't respect the figuring in one or two cases. Of course, as you listened, I had the ornamentation, free ornamentation, and I rendered something a little bit less scholastic and dry. But also in the sometimes in Martini Fugue, in this fugue, you can see that when he writes solo, I nevertheless I give a upper part above the solo, so I follow, like if the solo maybe was intended to be really solo, but I follow with a upper line, so I try to be more Bachian. But this of course is a further step possible in any case. Maybe it's not the more simple, more basic way, but in this Partimento, in the Prelude in trio, where I play the left hand 1 octave lower with a 4-footer stop, playing 1 octave upper. So this was a normal practice to be more comfortable in position and not play two. The second soprano is in a compass, maybe like a viola da gamba, not really, is also alto, sometimes go down to the tenor range, but like the model, of course, is that of Bach trio sonata writing for for double clavichord and pedal, now played by organists, and but in principle for two clavier pedal, so two clavichords and pedal. And the model is this. Of course, the fugue is in organo pleno, so full organ, and I think it's very interesting because you can create on this little basis, very simple, something interesting and musically enjoyable.
Yeah. Okay, let's hear it. Amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing. Woo!
Funny. It's funny. Yes,
Now, you were
it's funny.
smiling while you were listening. Why were you smiling? I was having a great time. What were you thinking about?
I was thinking about the the pedal stuff, the pedal work of these simple basses that are, of course, the prelude with these octave leaps is not so easy to play with pedal because nowadays every pedal has different measures, and so
Yeah.
and we have to, to be very careful don't mistake the octaves, and so I will take it that is an extreme way, but is the German way. You know that Bach Agricola in a Bach document speaks about it, how Bach taught composition. Also Kirchberger in his fundamental Bachian treatise composition treatise. But we know that, for example, there is a G major violin continuo sonata by Bach, and the same bass with the same figures it is also used in another sonata, a trio sonata for violin, flute, and continuo. And the violin, flute, and continuo sonata is clear is not by Bach. The G major, also in G major, the violin and continuo sonata, Bach-Werke Verzeichnis, if I remember well, 1021, the sonata in two parts, the sonata in trio, 1036, I think, or 38. In any case, they use the same continuo, and I think that these both were exercises made by Bach students, maybe Bach's children, maybe Friedemann or Kafi, or Krebs or other students, and he gave the Partimento of the three movement, the four, and also a fugue. The last is a fugue. The Partimento is by Bach. The two sonata a due, the sonata two violin continuo, and the sonata in trio are made by students on the Bach Partimento. So. Of course, you can take my colleague in Bergamo. I can tell maybe he doesn't become angry. My organ professor colleague after me in Bergamo, virtuoso organist, incredible organ improviser, Simone Weber. We speak very often about Partimento and about historical composition stuff, improvisation, and he gave me a trio sonata for two violins and continuo. He composed in pure 18th century Italian style, on four basses for partimentos by Alessandro Scarlatti. So, of course, the partimentos by Vallotti has been used always by my historical composition teacher, Giorgio Pacchioni, in order to compose messes, to compose trios, and they are maybe taken from messes. Also, the many Naples stuffs by Sala, by Leo, for sure are taken from vocal instrumental compositions, and they are not only basis for solo improvisation, but also for composition. And before I spoke about the importance of historical clefs. In Partimento is essential because when you have a change of clefs, you understand a new entry, mostly, not always, but mostly, of another voice. So the alto clef shows that you need to follow the basso seguente. So the lowest part is the alto. So without historical clefs, it's impossible to be really clear in Partimento, I think. You have to make a critical edition with modern clefs. It has no sense because you understand. Seger now.
So this is the last. This is the last.
Partimento, and this
Before
is very
we
important.
go into your compositions, yeah.
This is only a little sample, maybe not one of the most important. We know that in Prague, and also some of them in Berlin, but in Prague there are hundreds of partimentos by him, called in Latin fundamenta pro organo, so fundamental basic exercise for organ, or Generalbassübungsstücke, so pieces, exercises for continuo, or Orgelübungsstücke, or exercise for organ. So Partimento was intended firstly and mostly as organ composition didactic. And these pieces, only 50, I think, were published around 1832-30 by an Italian publisher in Prague, Marco Berra, if I remember well. And I take one from them, and he relies also in 4 parts in a more academical 19th century way. But there are also fugue by Padre Martini in this Partimento-Fugues. He used all 24 keys. He was one of the most important figure for the diffusion, widespreading of the Bach music in Bohemia. He used Wohltemperiertes Klavier fugues subjects for his own composition, and we know that Bach, it seems, Bach esteemed Seger a lot. Seger is
Bach
could
did.
be, yes, he was for sure the best organist in Prague in that moment.
He's much younger too than Bach.
Yes, he was like Bach's child, but it's interesting because in the Partimentos, I have to go to Prague to look really good, deeply these Partimentos. But I think why Martini is present in these exercises, because the professor, the teacher of Seger, or Segert, or Seger, or Seger, is possible in many forms, was Chernyakhovsky. Chernyakhovsky was a Franciscan monk. In 2 periods of his life, he was active in Italy as an organist of Assisi Franciscan main church, main monastery, and he was the second time in Padua in contact with Padre Vallotti, and so Rameau system in Italy, and he was also Chernyakhovsky, the professor in Padua, the teacher of Tartini. So I think that between Franciscan circles, he gets also Martini things. Maybe Chernyakhovsky was also in Bologna, and we have very few things, organ things of Chernyakhovsky, but there is a beautiful Italo-Bohemian, so South German, Austrian, Catholic fugues, in principle like Partimento-Fugues, but written down. And Chernyakhovsky was the professor of Seger. Seger wrote a lot of organ music, organ fugues, preludes, with a very rich harmony. Not very often, I think that there is a strong Bach harmonic influences. Also, he modulates a lot, also in far keys, and this is a very simple Partimento where he wanted an imitation at the beginning, and sometimes I do what Agricola, the student by Bach, under Bach, of Bach, wanted explain Bach wanted. So Agricola tell, in order to learn composition, take, for example, a dance movement of from a French suite by Bach, and you can take only the bass and rewrite a new right hand. When you have rewritten the new right hand, you can rewrite the left, the bass. So in order to create a nice composition after Baroque or late Baroque models, but also not late Baroque, also Romantic, of course, you can take the basis from Martini, from Mattei, from Durant, from Fenaroli, from Kirchhoff, and write what I don't like of Partimento. Normally, I don't like what Bach, I think, didn't like of Italian keyboard music. So the fact that the left hand works less than the right. Or that one hand works less than the right. Because in Partimento, if you have a very fast bass, normally you can, of course, create a very fast soprano. But if you have a slow soprano, normally you tend to give more notes in order don't let empty the harpsichord, the clavichord. No? With the organ is a little bit different because you have a very long sound. So you can take the Saratelli, for example, the first Saratelli we listened, and rewrite a bass motion with imitations between soprano, and you have a new piece on the pattern of Saratelli, harmonic pattern, on the sequences of harmonies, of figures, of numbers of Saratelli, but you can give a new thing. So after it, I propose to listen my original composition on a bass taken from a Cantus Fractus from Venice. Like a late Baroque Gregorian, original Neo-Gregorian liturgical music. And I wrote a Prelude and double Fugue, partitas, a sonata, and a ripieno for the toccata for the end of the Mass. So like an organ Mass on this long Cantus Firmus from a Sanctus. And these partitas are, I put the Cantus Firmus in the bass, like they are 8 notes. I use as partimento, basso ostinato for the partitas. And then, of course, you can see how these 8 notes from a simple harmonization became, after the models, the same of the best keyboard literature of the time. So Krieger, Pachelbel, Fischer, Bach, Handel, Pasquini. I follow one partita after the other with modulations, where also during the modulation I try to keep the same pattern of the bass, no? And also when I change key. But in Seger, what I do, sometimes I make diminutions of the bass. So this bass is taken from the only edition existing of 50 Partimentos by Seger. I will investigate as soon as possible all these stuffs in Prague, because I think they are very important and they are very good. It's very, this is very good material to compose also new things in that language.
Okay. Lovely.
And this is in 4 obbligato part. a little bit more Central European in the.
You were describing, you were talking about the partitas, you were setting it up. Why don't we, let me bring it up here. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about it, or should we just?
No, this partitas is one of the sample of my compositions, free compositions, of course, not based on partimentos, but in very strict historical style. In this case, you could imagine a keyboard virtuoso traveling to Italy, maybe from Central Germany or from Central Germany, with French influences a little bit, and then traveling to Austria, through Austria to Italy, and coming back to Germany, and we have this Venetian Cantus Firmus. You see in the. Can you make a little bit bigger, maybe?
Let me zoom in a bit.
Zoom, yes. We have this is a Sanctus preserved, a part of the Sanctus, the third acclamation, Sanctus, 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 Dominus Deus Sabaoth. And I decided to realize this is in G clef, so is a A, B flat, and I put this as ostinato bass. Only the 8th note. And these 8 notes became the basis of these variations, parties diverses, huit notes, dans le style des anciens maîtres, in the style of the historical or the old masters, composed during the lockdown, composé pendant les confinements.
Very productive.
I composed this organ mass because there was a concourse in Venice, and the students of mine took part, and I decided to, in parallel, to compose my version. I could, and this harpsichordist is a Saxon style clavichord built by Graziano Bandini. This clavichord is owned by the Bergamo Conservatory, where I taught harpsichord and basso continuo until last October for 21 years, together with the organ until 2014, and then only harpsichord because organ I moved to Genoa and now to Venice. And this was recorded, and it's the first time you can listen for the concourse for the professorship of harpsichord. And this was a private recording only for the school. Now the concourse is finished, so I decided to let you listen. This I played during the lockdown. We had to play without editing and without stopping a program of 20 minutes. I played several other composers and a composition of mine in pure Baroque, late Baroque style. So you can find images, figure from Bach, from Handel, from Fischer, from Krieger, maybe from Pachelbel, from Pasquini Bernardo. So this virtuoso traveled a lot and had many influences of the best European models, and this is a consequence of, for example, of the practice literature and Partimento together. So you can. This is one of the many possible expressions.
Great. Wow. That's awesome. That is such a good composition. I mean, I would be proud to have written something like that. Wow.
This
Really
is much
nice.
more funny than Partimento. So, yes, for me, because I can be free to
Right.
move with freedom between the you listen sometimes 5 voices, sometimes 2 or 3 for it
Mm,
like the historical masters. And
yeah.
this, but in every modulation, I try to follow the pattern of these 8 notes, even if and all this was composed on the thinking on my manuscript in the original sketches with numbers and with figures, of course, and everything was thought after the general bass system, so the
Mm,
Partimento system.
mm.
In these new cases,
Now we're
is
getting more and more modern. I like it.
yeah,
It's so
yes,
interesting because that's what I was saying at the beginning. It's like this lets you give you the freedom to compose once you've mastered once I mean people think that, oh, why should I learn an old system because I cannot, but you're proof that you obviously can write modern sounding stuff. You were very
yeah,
modest. You were saying like it's not avant-garde, but honestly, this I like you were saying, like 20th century Shostakovich, Prokofiev, Stravinsky. I can appreciate that sort of modern. There's a lot of modern that I don't really like, but anyway, why don't you talk about this one, this Prelude and Fugue? Oh, clearly, this is not the Baroque style, right?
I had a little bit a depression moment some years ago, pair of years ago, and I decided to to during the depressive moment I improvise or try to 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 take creativity from the depression, from the melancholy, and of course here I decided to publish my first 2 compositions I published because I consider them worth of publishing, and I'm very self-critical, of course, and so I tended to destroy many
Mm.
things I composed. I started to compose very, very, very young, but then I suspended composition because after Shostakovich, after Stravinsky, after what is possible to do, no? And so it's only possible maybe to do something that are imitations, but then when I became older and more mature, or more why don't use my language that is a language maybe of 100 years ago in a new way with my experience of repertoire, of course, of early repertoire, and so for me, counterpoint, you understand. After all this speech is very important, and I wanted to came back to piano. I studied piano. My just beginning was as a piano student. I had the luck. I was lucky to study with the first student in Bologna of Benedetti Michelangeli, Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli, the first degree by him in 1941, which was a very severe and very hard woman, and and then she didn't want to. I followed with my piano studies when she discovered. I started to study organ in the same Bologna
Mhm.
Conservatory, and she was very angry with me, and see, she decided that I couldn't study any more piano, and then I never finished my piano studies. But then, of course, my piano experiences are as listener. I love the research on the historical performing practice. So I listen a lot of piano rolls of pianists who lived and recorded before the First War, normally,
Mm.
or just after the First War, before when they played with spreading hands, with arpeggio, and with a very different cantabile way from the modern pianism. And my harmonical experiences on piano touch are those of Russian school, Bartok, maybe. I don't know, because I really try to improvise as I feel now without to think too much formally. I'm maybe a formalist. Of course, I love the best, for me, the most important keyboard compositions of the century. They are the 24 Prelude and Fugues by Shostakovich. I love Shostakovich. I consider him maybe the best, the most complete, the best, the most incredible composer and musician, maybe after Brahms until today. But of course, also Stravinsky is very difficult to make comparing between.
Right.
So big genius. But the language of Shostakovich is a little bit more near to me, more irrational, more passionate, and of course, not everything of Shostakovich is near me. But the period after the travel to Leipzig for the Bach competition, the Bach Fest. I have here a beautiful book about the Bach Fest, Leipzig of 1950. When he came back to Moscow, and he wrote these Prelude and Fugues in very few days, in some weeks, and as improviser, with the most important keyboard counterpoint after Brahms, I think. And in any case, the most expressive. So this Prelude and Fugue, the piano Prelude and Fugue, I published 2 Prelude and Fugues, and I'm writing a third one. I promised the publisher to give also a third one. The first 2 were written. The first written was this, and 2 weeks later the other. This is for piano. The other is for harpsichord or clavichord or piano. I personally played on a harpsichord, on a Raag historical piano, and it functions very well. The second one, and also the clavichord. But this is just for piano. On the Raag Kafi, so Indian mode is of course is the less idiomatic Indian mode, because it's the same of Dorian mode. There is only a little bit more important, is a little bit more important the second degree in comparison with the Dorian mode. But this, there is I think, but I don't like to speak about music, and there is a melancholic mood. The fugue is my answer, but my very modest answer to the first fugue in C major of the Prelude and Fugues by Shostakovich. The structure, the idea is the same. He used a diatonic major scale, so and only of 7 notes, and there are 7 entries of the subjects and answers. In at the beginning, the dominant, so tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant. But the other 5 entries are without any transposition, also the dominant. But we have only 7 notes. In this case, we have only 7 notes. The Dorian mode is transposed 1 tone down, so is on C, the Raag Kafi. And in the prelude, what happens? The prelude is also diatonic modal, the same mode, but at the beginning you have the transposition of the modal scale, and then there is like a da capo, a sort of da capo, where the same material is not anymore transposed, but kept on the C. And then there is the mood maybe of the piece of the prelude that sounds maybe French, I don't know, or maybe also jazz. No, we could. And there are, yes, I don't know if the harmony is quartal, tertian, or maybe I know, but I joke a little bit. But I don't think in these terms. I think there is a 5 plus 6. There is a 2 plus 5 plus 6. There is a, so from the bass, like continuo, and of course the movement maybe, if I analyze after my composition, would be a little, have a sort of Bach oboe solo from a cantata, something like this, like a diminution of a solo instrument with a tremolo d'archi, restringing bass. Of course, this is the first time I let list in public. Is a performance made after many hours of organ lessons in Genoa Conservatory on the beautiful Steinway piano from 1970. They have one of the two in the concert hall under the organ where I taught, and this was made with very few editing, and there are also noises from the conservatory. I did another recording, not yet edited with video, but it's the first time you listen it with score. The score is published by Da Vinci Edition, distributed by all Leonards, and I think this is a good piece. I'm quite satisfied also after 2 years, and let's listen.
Let's do it. That was very beautiful. Very beautiful.
Okay.
Oh, I think we need to take a minute before we play the next one. We need to just relax a little bit. Wow. That was beautiful. We know it's been a really, I'm so thankful that you've been so gracious with your time to share your beautiful music, your realizations. It's been a real treat. And sad to say, we only have two more pieces, but I think we'll end strongly because they're very nice pieces. So why don't we talk about this is also quite a modern sounding piece, a harpsichord prelude and fugue.
The harpsichord prelude, we could tell that the prelude is serial. It's serial, but in a pan-diatonic serial way. So there is a series of 7 notes, diatonic mode. So the ionic mode, so the modern major. And what happens? The prelude is written down. You will see in notation of prelude non mesuré, like the French 17th century and also beginning of 18th century French harpsichord school. Louis Couperin may be the most important for sure of the prelude non mesuré composers. And what happens? You can play as you prefer rhythmically in this case, but you have to hold down all the notes as much as possible. Of course, in the piano performance, you can use the pedal, but the harpsichord notes, I have a series of 8 notes. The last note, black, is a repetition, is the only repetition of one of the 7 notes. So the order is always different, and there are, of course, transpositions of the series with other finales in Latin, so other tonics, passage tonic. But this is my way to be serial, my only possible way. I tried when I was young also 12-tone composition, but maybe I will do one short lead song, Latin in dodecaphony, but I'm not so sure. Not yet. I have some idea, but is after all an historical way. But the fugue, this fugue, I think that there is an unconscious Brahms influence of the A minor organ fugue, where he used all this writing of triplets against binary rhythms, and this sounds very nice at the harpsichord, because it's like if you have the synchronous and synchronous placing of notes, and this is very nice with the shortness of the sound, the harpsichord sound, and non lasciare vuoto lo strumento, like Frescobaldi told, so don't let empty the harpsichord sound. And the fugue is in 3 parts this time. This time there are also dominant answers, real dominant, so with a modulation. But if you analyze good, if you look during performance, the keys are not the standard keys of modulation of fugue. I use far modulation and degrees that are not. There is the willing to avoid a tonal center, of course. There are also enharmonical, we could tell, modulations, but I consider the fugue in some way pan-diatonic, in any case diatonic, and like most of my writing. Also, the last piece will be pan-diatonic, only with some exceptions, like now in the prelude. There are some little exceptions, but I prefer 7 notes than 12, maybe. But there are beautiful Partimento-Fugue in Panseron in very romantic style to deepen, and I like, of course, the late romantic language when it's Bach influenced, like in Schumann or in Brahms.
Mhm.
But then this is my way to improvise. The fugue, I destroyed some fugues in order to keep this. And I destroyed 2 or 3 fugues, and they were very interesting. But at the half, during the half, I destroyed. And this could be published. I think. It's not. This was the first piece was dedicated to a great Polish pianist, Marcin Mazecki. He's a fantastic classic pianist and also a jazz pianist. And this harpsichord piece is dedicated to my friend, fantastic clavichord and harpsichord player conductor Apo Akinen. This performance you listen was made on his harpsichord, 16-foot harpsichord after Haas. The harpsichord is in Helsinki. Invited me for a recital in Helsinki, harpsichord and clavichord recital, and I played for the first time, not for the second, because I played before at the piano in Bologna. For the third, also to the clavichord, but for the first time publicly on the harpsichord in Helsinki last year, not last, well, 1 year and a half ago. We are now in January. Okay, I hope you enjoy it.
Here we go. Very nice. Awesome.
Thank you.
Very nice. This is so sad. For me, it's nighttime, but they were coming to the end. I'm so sad. It's been a very special.
Long. It's very long.
This is a special New Year episode, and I think this is a great way to start the New Year 2024 with such a nice episode.
Hopefully.
And yeah, I think it's great. Now, the last piece. Can you talk about this madrigal? It's very special.
The last
madrigal.
is yes, is a madrigal. As I told before, I'm composing since lockdown a cycle of 10 songs when I have time and inspiration for voice, for mezzo soprano and piano on Neo-Latin verses by poets living or just of the 20th century or living. And so they write still Latin. One of the most important Latin poet of the second part of the 20th century was born in Italy, Giuseppe Tusiani. He immigrated to USA, to New York, and he was professor of Italian literature in New York, in one of the colleges of New York, and he's Joseph Tusiani. He died in 2020, and I started to compose a song about the underground of New York in Latin. You can find it in YouTube together with a Pascoli lullaby, and from this important Italian, also Latin poet, and so I came in touch with Tusiani and his Italian translator, and I discovered this poet that wrote in 4 languages: in English, in Italian, in the dialect of his village from South Italy, and in Latin. And when I read this Aubade in Grey, that is an English poem, a small poem, I was very impressed by the intensity and the musicality of the verses. It was always very musical in Latin, Italian, in English. He was also laureate poet of the state of New York, and he won a competition for English poetry when he was very young. And this is Aubade in Grey. So Aubade is what is Aubade? It's the opposite of serenade. So you sing is a love song for the morning, a morning song. And here the morning is the morning before the world creation by God. And I was very impressed by it. And when 1 year and a half ago was April 2022, I had some moments in which I decided to write for a cappella choir or for 4 singers this little piece, using my pan-diatonic style, but using also the Elizabethan madrigal style, like a little bit the beautiful music madrigals by Gibbons. I wanted to recreate the mood in a modern language of the madrigalism. So the contrast of affects and the alternation of counterpointal imitation moments and homorhythmical, homophonic moments after the meaning of the word. So I tried to give images of every word, like Marenzio, like Monteverdi, like the English madrigal composers. And I had occasion to conduct it last October with the most maybe famous early music ensemble, Cappella Cracoviensis, now the artistic director, and is Jan Tomasz Adamus, and sometimes I have been invited as guest conductor. In this case, for two concerts in Italy with a Polish polychoral repertoire, and we put together. I'm trying even more and more to insert my composition, sometimes in historical style, when the organ harpsichord are sometimes in more modern language during recitals, because I think it's interesting to listen also something of my musical composition understanding during my interpretations of repertoire. So here we have four. We had a very few time to rehearse, and this is a difficult piece for intonation. But the four singers, Antonina Ruda, Łukasz Ulewicz, Dominik Czernik, and Przemysław Józef Balka, have been very good. And this is live during the second concert in Brescia for the Settimane Barocche, of this beautiful poem about the moment before the world creation and the timelessness. Thank you.
All right, here we go. Let me do that one more time. You see, I brought the volume down. All right, let's try that again.
Timelessness
Well, Professor Messori, final thoughts for students, for fans, for teachers, for all the people for 2024. You're the first guest for this year, and that was a really fantastic episode. We talked about Partimento. We went further into other post pan diatonic styles. What are some thoughts for let's maybe bring it back to music and music education and helping students and people who are listening and music lovers. What message would you like to share?
To try to express with the freedom of the maturity, but of course, without forget that we have always models, so great models, so incredible, unreachable models before us, and so to try to express our own musicality, musical sense with freedom, but not forgetting never what happened before us, because I think maybe after Johann Sebastian Bach, we are all without the possibility to reach again such a high point, musical point. But we have still many geniuses who can help us to express with interpretations, with compositions, improvisation, the highest activity of human being, I think, is music. The moment more near to the truth, or to the truths, but and try to enjoy. And I know that music, like every heart, is fruit of high functioning autism, but and we suffer a lot also in this isolation of our condition of artists, but then for students to think that you arrive with persevere, if you persevere in the research of bettering the better, you arrive to enjoy what you can produce, and the human being is so different, so we have too many ways to express this musically, and of course I don't like atonality, but there are beautiful masterworks of atonality, and I think that the most important thing would be to think that during one age they had a way of thinking also very different, but there were in order to analyze Bach, it's not important to be a Rameau follower in order to understand Bach, but to understand César Franck is much more important, for example. And so I'm not against the Rameau system, because I wanted to go back to the polemic. I think that it's not necessary to use these to produce or to understand it, to perform one period, and it's like to use other parameters they didn't know, they didn't want to have, maybe, like Bach against the Rameau system. But of course, this is important to know if you want to produce music in maybe in the Ravel style. I don't know. Then I think analysis is very important to understand, but is the real analysis is made through interpretation. So and I think we have to be more practical in order to understand better the past. These are things, but these are things very common, and I I don't invent anything. I try to deepen my musical obsessions, and try to understand how they thought, how they composed, played, and the cantabile style, the bel canto style in the instrumental approach that is necessary for every organist, every clavichord player, every violin player. There are many, but this is a matter for another interview. Many misunderstandings in the early music movement world now. There are many fashions completely far from I think, from my idea of sound, of interpretation of gestures of that age, because we always think that what is romantic is opposite to the Baroque. No. What is the real revolutions have been made after the First War, between this, from Middle Age to the First War. There was much more continuity, we think. There were a lot, of course, of fashions, of new instruments, the piano, the organ changed in every kilometer, every year, but the style of composing also, but in the common practice system, there were always the cantabile style of the dissonance and the resolution of dissonances. So we have this, we have the crescendo from the preparation of the dissonance, the sforzati the dissonance, the diminuendo. And this is the general rule. And then we can move the opposite, because music is variety, so we tend to variety. We can do the opposite. So I think that for keyboard player, the most important thing is to understand the cantabile style, the singing treatises, the singing way to listening. All singers of bel canto tradition before the First War, not the verists, Luisa Tetrazzini, to listen Paderewski to understand Couperin, to listen how to spread the chords, how to play inégal. In jazz, the inégalité is still living in the classical music of the rigid 20th century, with the metronome cultus myth. This is the opposite of what happened in every historical sources of the express musician, not of the worse musician. Explain us that in order to express emotions, text words like Madrigal, you have to change continuously in a very elegant way, timing, inégalité, égalité. So this happened in the Paderewski Chopin, or in the Couperin, beautiful by Paderewski, but it happens also in Bach, and there are testimonies of it. Of course, it happened in Frescobaldi, in the Italian seconda pratica style, that is the invention of this free singing style, and also about articulation, but we have I'm a little bit always less and less in agreement with many colleagues, but this for my research on the sources, of course, and we could speak really for days. And so don't follow too much the fashions. Now Partimento is a fashion. I was engaged in it, but I tried to do it like a game. Often I prepare partimentos after dinner, like digestive, and I go, I record what I try to do, and then when there are good ideas, in order to fix, don't forget. I write down, but it's possible to write Partimento. It was maybe not the first goal, Partimento, but Partimento, the intavolatura, the literature written down are Partimentos, Panzerontes, in order to realize good this basis, look to Bach, look to Handel. So these are, and I remember Bach, there are copies of Bach preludes of the first book of Volte Perites Clavier, in which the copist write down after the prelude the Partimento of the prelude. You can find in Petrucci also this copy, and so you have the harmonic base with numbers of all the prelude. Of course, more for the chordal arpeggio prelude, but there are testimonies. So there is always a Partimento, a continuo, figured bass movement idea in the brain of the composers from the continuo age to Mahler. Brahms wrote, I remember the beginning of the Fourth Symphony. There is the melody, the bass with the numbers. This is the first sketch. Brahms studied Fuchs, studied Marpur, studied Kirchberger, and was a very fan of historical counterpoint of Schütz, great genius. And so try to don't follow too much the now Bach is Glenn Gould or Bach is Leonard or Bach. Bach is not this. Is a little bit of everybody. So maybe is the freedom of the approach, not be too academic, and also this. I hate academism of today. I prefer the academism of Padre Martini, not the anti-academism by Bach. In Paolucci, they speak about the German fugues for keyboard by Mr. Handel, Mr. Bach, Mr. Scarlatti also, and he tells Paolucci, but it's Martini, the professor. You see the freedom of the fugue for keyboard. So I don't think that is so necessary. The school fugue is a nice exercise in order to develop brain and technique, but is an academic dry. The Bach fugues are never dry, and I want to finish remembering the words I've read in a Bach document recently. There was like an interview to Bach made by Marburg, walking under the trees of Leipzig, and Bach is reported. Bach told about the fugue, and Bach told that the most fugues of earlier masters and also of contemporary masters are missing of fire. And this is my, I feel since I was 4 and I listened to Bach, Prelude and Fuga, I was shocked, and I decided to play all my life Bach, dedicate a musical life to him in this autismus. I of course, a lot of people made the same, and we are organists or we are keyboard players, but the fire in the fugue. I listen. Why I'm not really a fan of the Naples or also some Italian didactical fugue system is very nice. They were genius, and they wrote also very nice Catholic music. But the last Catholic music for me are the Ricercate, the Capricci by Frescobaldi. This is the highest contrapuntal keyboards, but contrapuntal style of the great Italy of Renaissance of the 16th century, or the Marenzi, the Palestrina things, the Flemish mixed with Italians, so in Ferrara. But after it, in a counterpoint on the general bass system of the duality of the modern tonality, major minor, Johann Sebastian Bach made things impossible to repeat, but so high, and this have fire. So what to try to always to feel to reach the fire, we have in the best music in the human being. Thank you very much.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the great Professor Matteo Messori. And to my dear audience, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.